Hi, my name is Richard Cimino. My wife Valerie and I, we live in Northern California in a little city called Roseville. We're about an hour and a half east of San Francisco, if you want a reference point. Last week, I had the privilege of being in Southern California to teach at Calvary Chapel Costa Mesa's pastor school. And on one day, while I was down there, a really good friend of mine and we took a walk along a stretch of beach there in Southern California called Crystal Cove. It's really gorgeous. And when we were done, we went up onto the bluff and we were looking out over the Pacific Ocean. And as I am so many times when I look at that body of water, I am stunned by the vastness of it. And sometimes I think about what would it be like to be dropped in the middle, just a human being, one person dropped in the middle of that vast body of water. It's kind of horrifying to think about it. But as vast as the Pacific Ocean is, it is finite. It actually does reach a shore. We can't get our heads around how vast that body of water is, but it is quantifiable. It's 162 million square kilometers in size, which is greater than the size of all the land masses on planet Earth collected. We could drop it into the Pacific Ocean. But the gospel confronts us with another ocean. In the events of the death of Jesus Christ on a Roman cross and his bodily resurrection from the grave 3 days after his death, there in the week of Passover 32 AD, we're confronted with an ocean of love and grace, an ocean of mercy and justice, an ocean of wisdom and power. And that ocean, guys, it has no shore. As that old hymn says, it's vast beyond all measure. Listen to what Paul says in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 7. He says, so that in the coming ages he might show the immeasurable riches of his grace in kindness towards us in Christ Jesus. The love and grace, the mercy and justice, the wisdom and power of God involved in rescuing rebels, that's you and me, is so vast that we're going to spend eternity drinking it in. We'll spend eternity appreciating it. We'll spend eternity responding to it in worship and adoration. Now, I have to confess that as someone who gets the privilege every year to tell people about those things at Easter, I always feel like I've been dropped in the middle of that infinite ocean. And I think like, well, which direction do we even start to swim in? Where do we even start to talk about it? I mean, I'm overwhelmed by just a single cubic meter of God's relentless rescuing love. So it's like, how do I even begin to talk about a little patch of it, let alone the vast ocean of it? Well, the gospel tells us how vast that ocean is by trying to explain to us that the God of glory became man. And that's the historic event that we celebrate at Christmas. The God of glory became man so that he could redeem inglorious rebels. That's you and me. So he could rescue the very ones who wanted their own glory more than his glory. And that's you and me. So that he could offer himself as the wrath-appeasing sacrifice for every act of treason against him. And guys, that is what sin is. That is what idolatry is. It is, as D.A. Carson put it, it's the de-godding of God. I read this quote by John Lennox, powerful. He says, so serious is that moral infection that the business of restoring men and women to fellowship with their Creator will involve something much bigger than creation itself. It will involve nothing less than the Creator becoming human, dying at the hands of his creatures, and rising again in triumph over sin and death. And that's exactly the gospel. That's exactly what God did. God became man. And it's so mind-blowing to think that he made himself fatally vulnerable to man's wickedness because it was the only way to save us from our wickedness. I want to leave you with this. The Bible tells us that love of God for you and me, it surpasses knowledge. That ocean that's vast beyond all measure, it surpasses the capacity of you and me to comprehend it intellectually. But the Bible also tells us that every man and woman who believes the gospel can know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge. We actually are dropped into that ocean of God's love and grace, wisdom and power, mercy and justice. and we experience it without measure. We can experience in our hearts a love that's impossible for us to know with our heads. So here's my prayer for all of you, and I'm borrowing it from the Apostle Paul from Ephesians chapter 3, beginning at verse 14. He says, "For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God." May God bless you this Easter richly in the experiential knowledge of the vast infinite ocean of his great